את כל הכוכבים תמן, את הסהר עטף בשחור, מצפון ועד תימן אין קרן אור. אור זרוע לצדיק ולישרי לב שמחה, אור זרוע לצדיק ולישרי לב שמחה, אור זרוע לצדיק ולישרי לב שמחה, אור זרוע לצדיק ולישרי לב שמחה. צדיק ולישרי לב שמחה.
Very nice, thank you. Yes.
Good evening. I'm Rabbi Leah Mühlstein, one of the rabbis of the Synagogue and the International Chair of Arzenu. It's such a privilege to welcome you to this evening's panel discussion marking Yom Ha'atzmaut, Israel Independence Day. A very warm welcome to the members of the three hosting congregations of this evening, the Ark Synagogue, Finchley Reform Synagogue, and Sha'arei Tsedek, North London Reform Synagogue, as well as members of Arzenu UK and numerous other Reform and Liberal synagogues from around the UK and beyond. Before we turn to the topic of tonight's discussion and to our wonderful panelists, let me take the liberty to say just a few words about Arzenu. Arzenu is the political voice of Reform, Progressive, and Liberal religious Zionists. Our mission is to bring progressive Jews together and work alongside fellow progressive Jews in Israel on being constructive partners in working to fulfill the vision of the founders of the State of Israel, to develop the land for the benefit of all its inhabitants, and to implement the prophetic ideals of liberty and justice. We advocate for Israel as it should be and must become, embracing religious pluralism, protecting minorities, and ensuring that our values are reflected in Israel today and tomorrow. As passionate Zionists, we believe that Israel should hold a prominent place in all Reform, Progressive, and Liberal Jewish congregations around the world. With and through our local constituents, such as Arzenu in the UK, we bring Israel into our congregations and promote the work of the Israel movement for Reform and Progressive Judaism. We know that our dream for a modern state of Israel that is inclusive, moral, and a home for all of us can only be achieved if we truly accept the dictate of the Talmud, which is really the title of tonight's event, Kol Yisrael Aravim Zeh Bazeh, that whether we are in the UK, in Israel, in Ukraine, or in Romania, we are all responsible for each other. Together we will work on realizing our dream for an Israel that continues to be worthy of celebration. And so, as I thank the wonderful musicians of the IMPJ who shared this beautiful music at the start with us, I want to hand over to my colleague Rabbi Deborah Bloston at Finchley Reform Synagogue, who will be introducing my good friend, member of Knesset, Rabbi Gilad Kariv. And I hand over with the words spoken at the official torch-lighting ceremony for Yom Ha'atzmaut on Mount Herzl, to the glory of the State of Israel, Uletifaret Medinat Yisrael.
Thank you so much, Leah. It's lovely to welcome you all here to FRS this evening as we try and bridge some of the geographical distance we feel so acutely in Gilad. It's so lovely to see you and to be able to introduce you this evening. So Rabbi Gilad Kariv is going to kick us off this evening. Rabbi Kariv has served as director of the Israel Religious Action Center, as the leader of the Israel Movement for Reform and Progressive Judaism, and most recently added the letters MK to his list of titles as he was elected to the Knesset in last year's Israeli elections. Gilad, I'm wondering if you might kick us off this evening by helping us to understand some of the political conversations going on in Israel at the moment around the war in Ukraine, and particularly Israel's relationship with Russia and how Israel sits in the geopolitical space.
So shalom, dear friends, Erev Tov, Chag Atzmaut Sameach. I'll start by sharing with you that while we are concluding Israel's Independence Day and all the celebrations that took place in the last 24 hours. Unfortunately, we learned about another terror attack, this time in the ultra-Orthodox city of Elad, which is quite close to Tel Aviv. And according to the current update, 3 Israeli citizens were killed in this terror attack. And in a very tragic way, they join a sad list of 15 Israeli civilians that were killed in terror attacks during the days of Ramadan, the Muslim month, which was concluded a few days ago. And in a way, it's a painful reminder to the reality we have to deal with here in Israel. Now, addressing your question, Rabbi, it is not a secret that in the last few years, Israel is being challenged with its northern front because of the developments in Syria and in Lebanon, more challenged than ever. Around this security challenge, Israel has, I don't want to say complicated, I want even to say Israel had a very solid and good political cooperation with Russia that enabled Israel to protect its northern border. Those political relations are also connected to the fact that we have today in Israel more than 1 million Israelis that are actually also Russian citizens, and the Jewish community in Russia is, of course, one of the more important Jewish communities. And at the same time, Israel successfully developed strong and vibrant relations with the Ukraine. And like other countries that belonged to the Eastern Bloc till the end of the 80s, and the war between Russia and Ukraine, the Russian attack on and Ukraine definitely caught Israel in challenging political and diplomatic situation. Israel is very clear, especially in the last few weeks, in regard to its support for Ukraine. The senior ministers, including the prime minister, said in a very clear way that Israel condemns Russia for its military actions in Ukraine. Israel was very clear about its expectations from Russia, and Israel joined the international coalition in the UN decisions that were taken in regard to this conflict. More than that, as I'm sure you all know, Israel is involved in presenting humanitarian support for Ukraine, both medical support and financial support. At the same time, Israel needs to maintain its dialogue with Moscow, mainly in order to secure the IDF ability to operate in our northern border. And as responsible leaders, the Prime Minister and the Foreign Minister are balancing those two duties to keep Israel's ability to defend itself and to take part in this international alliance that demands Russia to end its military actions in Ukraine.
And I guess one issue that's come to the political fore in Israel is the question of how the current refugee crisis illuminates the challenges of the current refugee policy in the state of Israel. I know that there's some quite interesting and exciting work being done as a result of the number of people who've expressed a desire to come to Israel. Wondering if you might share a little bit with us about that.
So here again, I want to be fully transparent with all of you. I belong to a party and to a political bloc in the Israeli Knesset that criticized the first policy presented by our government vis-a-vis the issue of the refugee crisis. At the beginning, Israel didn't respond in fast enough to this developing crisis. It has, of course, to do like in other countries with the general debate over immigration policies, and my party and my political bloc, we were loud and clear that Israel must contribute to the international effort, which is right now mainly a European effort to deal with the refugee crisis. Right now, Israel is holding actually a 3 levels policy. First, we need to remember that because of the law of return, all Ukrainian Jews and their family members, their immediate family members, the second generation and the third generation of Jewish families are welcome to immigrate to Israel and to become immediately Israeli citizens. This policy is, of course, valid also today, and Israel is welcoming thousands of Ukrainian Jews that are coming to Israel, that are making Aliyah, mainly because they want to, or are forced to leave Ukraine, and they choose to come to Israel. I need to say that we are facing also a new wave of Aliyah from Russia. We see many Jewish families that are leaving Russia and asking to come to Israel and to immigrate to Israel because of the war and the political situation in Russia. The second level has to do with people, Ukrainian citizens that are not eligible to make Aliyah, but still they have relatives in Israel. And those family members, although they are not allowed to immigrate to Israel as olim, are welcomed by the state of Israel as refugees. And here, please keep in mind that today in Israel, we have more than 200,000 Ukrainian olim that came in the last 20 years. So we are talking about a huge circle of family members that can come to Israel today as refugees and receive support from the government. The third level has to do with people that have no connection to Israelis, to Israeli families, or to Israel in general. And here the Israeli government announced that we will welcome 5,000 refugees above and beyond those new olim. And we're pushing the government to expand this number, and I believe that we will successful in doing so.
That's brilliant. Thank you so much, Gilad. I can see that Leah has a hand up.
I do have my hand up, but it is actually not a question from me. I'm just asking it on behalf of Tamar, and I wonder if I can just come in with Tamar's question. How is Israel helping Ukrainian refugees integrate into Israeli society?
So here again, first I want to remind us all that we are at the initial stages of this humanitarian crisis. In the end, I think that, and it's the same case with European countries, we don't know yet if those Ukrainian citizens can go back to their country in the near future. We don't know what will happen in the coming few weeks and months. So I think that it is, in a way, a little bit a premature question, in the sense that right now what we need to offer those refugees is not a full integration in the Israeli society. What we need to offer them is basic humanitarian support. Basically, they came with nothing to Israel. We need to offer them medical support and to offer them emotional, psychological support. And unfortunately, Israel has a lot of experience in dealing with post-traumatic situations. We need to make sure that they have a decent housing solution for the next few months. And we are making a real effort to offer them different venues of making a living in Israel, after we offer them, of course, an initial financial support. This is the case with those refugees that are not new olim. When we are talking about Ukrainian Jews or descendants of Jewish families that want to make Aliyah, here again, the policies are not new. Israel is investing many efforts in integrating new olim, people that are not refugees but are leaving the airport as citizens. Here, those new olim receive massive support in their process of integration, from learning Hebrew to more solid and long-term housing solution, a larger scale of financial support. And we need always to keep in mind this basic difference between Ukrainian citizens that are coming to Israel and asked to become citizens of Israel according to the law of return. So actually, they leave the airport as citizens and not as refugees. And those Ukrainian citizens that cannot make Aliyah, but Israel is welcoming them as war refugees.
Thank you so much. Does anyone have a question for Rabbi Kariv that has not been asked already?
I think Sha'arei Tsedek is waving at us.
Hi, good evening. A question from me, actually. I'm just wondering how the comments recently with the accusations of there being this the Russian idea of associating events activists in the leadership in the Ukraine as Nazis, and the use of the Holocaust and this idea of Jews being the worst anti-Semites. Obviously, that's a very provocative political comment. How does that land with the Israeli public? And I think I understand pretty well how the government and diplomatic service are handling it, but how does that land with the public? What's the impact of that kind of statement?
So I'll start by saying that 2 hours ago, the Prime Minister's office in Israel, in Jerusalem, released a statement that President Putin called Prime Minister Bennett and apologized for this unacceptable, outrageous comment that was presented by the Secretary of State Lavrov in regard to the Jewish roots of Hitler. No need to discuss this anti-Semitic comment, and it's good that even President Putin understood that a red line was crossed. But I need to say that there is no debate among Israelis in regard to the situation between Russia and Ukraine. The Israeli public fully support Ukraine. It is extremely interesting to see the response of the Israelis with Russian citizenship. As I said, we have almost a million Israelis that either came from Russia or are the first generation of Russian olim. Many of them kept their Russian citizenship. Many of them have relatives still in Russia and maintain a very solid cultural and even political dialogue with their old country. And according to all polls and studies, the vast majority of Israelis with Russian citizenship support Ukraine and resist the military actions presented by Russia. And we had massive demonstrations in Tel Aviv before Pesach in support of Ukraine. And I will not be surprised if the vast majority of people that attended there actually or originally came from Russia. So in that regard, we didn't need the anti-Semitic remarks of Lavrov in order to understand to which side we need to offer our support. And in that regard, the Israeli public is fully aligned with the other Western societies.
I think your outlining of the political consensus. People in Israel talk about the Putin's aliyah. Your outlining of the political consensus gives us a really neat segue into our next speakers. One who's going to talk about Israel's work around the world, and another who's going to talk about the absorption efforts and the amazing work of our sister movement in Israel. So, Rabbi Kareem, thank you so much for being with us. And it was really lovely to see you. And I'm going to pass the baton across Finchley to the other side of North Finchley, all the way to Sha'arei Tsedek and to Rabbi Shulamit Amberley.
Hello, coming to you from Sha'arei Tsedek. For something feels a bit Eurovision-y here, I feel. Maybe we should burst into song, those of us in the community. But I'm really grateful to be able to introduce Deputy Ambassador of Israel to Romania, Amir Sagron, who is speaking to us from Bucharest this evening. And we're so grateful that you've been able to make some time to be with us. Thank you. And you have spent a lot of time on the ground at the border, which I'm really interested to hear you. I'd love you to share your experience of providing humanitarian assistance and some of the very shocking, powerful, upsetting experiences and also inspiring experiences that you have had in the last few weeks, Amir, supporting those who are fleeing Ukraine and indeed those who are unable to leave the country. So if you could go over to you now, I'd be really grateful for you to share some of your experiences with us.
Thank you, Rabbi. Shalom, everyone. It's a pleasure being here this evening. I'll do my best to try and describe what was the work we did and still are doing. I'll start by saying that everything started for us in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, everything started weeks before the attacks on Ukraine actually started. We were preparing more than 2 weeks ahead for this moment when we will need to stop everything that we are doing, which is mostly a political work to better the relations of Israel with the countries where we're in, and focus on one main target, and that's the first one, which is to find a way and get more than 15,000 Israeli passport holders who live in Ukraine. More than that, we knew about hundreds of thousands of Jewish Ukrainians who do not hold an Israeli passport. So the first thing we did, and when I say it, I mean the Embassy of Israel in Romania, the Embassy of Israel in Poland, the Embassy of Israel in Hungary and in Slovakia, was to plan where is the main crossing point which we should focus on because of our manpower. We can't be everywhere, and with whom we need to already speak, hotels that we need to reserve, all logistics we did more than a week before actually the war started. And the day, I remember this Thursday, when we woke up knowing that Russia attacked Ukraine, we were already ordering the flight tickets to fly to the northern part of Romania, to the border between Romania and Ukraine, to what is called the crossing of Synagogue. We were there for almost a month, 3.5 weeks, physically living there in some hotel on 100 meters from the crossing point. The ambassador, myself, the consul, and I left my family, my 2 kids, 3 and 6-year-olds, with their mother, my wife, in Bucharest, and I was there, fully focused, and basically we stopped everything else that we are doing, everything that is related to our diplomatic work. Now, we had 2 main objectives. One is humanitarian aid, and I will speak about that in a second. And the first was to get, like I said, at first, the Israeli passport holders, Ukrainians, out from the Ukraine, first of all, to take them out from the war zone, and also help Jewish Ukrainians as much as we can. Now, I want to explain what does it mean to help. First of all, when the war started, the Ukrainians started fleeing from all over eastern Ukraine, Kiev, of course, Odessa and other parts, and they were fleeing to the western part of Ukraine, trying to exit through 2 main points: the border with Romania and the border with Poland. We, from the first day, we had a special phone number that we got on the first day, and this dumb phone never stopped ringing for a month, 24/7. We got phone calls from people immediately from within Ukraine, from Israel, their relatives, their families, their friends. And the first thing we did was to communicate and help them realize how they can exit. The second thing we did was actually physically being there to help those who crossed. Women and children under the age of 18 did not have, in most cases, did not have a problem to cross. They had to stand in line. In the beginning, it was for days. And after, it was an average of 18 hours, 10 hours, and so on. But the most challenging group was men 18 to 60 with double citizenship. To them, with Israeli citizenship, with Israeli passport, and because they are men, and according to the Ukrainian regulations, they were asked to stay and fight, or at least to be potentially to stay and enlist. We had, in many cases, and many of them ran out and left without passports, or did not renew their passports, or never got a physical passport. We needed to be there at the border, in creative ways, find ways to bring them into Romania, out of Ukraine. It was, I'll give you an example. Some days we couldn't cross to the Ukrainian side. We couldn't physically cross. They didn't let us. So what we did, I was on the telephone with this guy, and I'm telling him, send your wife and children into Romania. I will meet them. I had this small tent. I brought them inside. It was -7 degrees with a Siberian wind, and I physically wrote the approval, the certificate, and asked the mother, told the mother, I'm keeping an eye on your children. Please, you now go inside Ukraine again and bring your husband. Just one example. We had groups coming in the middle of the night after being on the road for days. One example is a Jewish orphanage from Odessa. 2-3 buses came in the middle of the night, and we had first of all to be there for them, to arrange buses in the middle of the night, to make sure in the meantime they have somewhere to stay, to communicate with them, to calm them down a little bit, to explain what's going to be the next for them. We had one project when I got a call from an Israeli woman in Israel saying that they would like us to help them bring 11 non-Jewish children from a children's hospital in Kiev and bring them eventually to the Schneider Hospital in Israel. They arranged with us a private plane that waited on the Romanian side, an hour from the crossing. We were waiting for them on the Romanian side, and they're not coming. And we were in touch for 2 days about this project, and we are waiting for them, and they're not coming. That moment, the ambassador, David Saranga, and myself, we go physically into Ukraine with the Romanians, with whom we were in very good relations. And the Romanians were speaking with the Ukrainians and telling them, trying to explain to them, the Ukrainians on the Ukrainian side spoke Romanian. And they explained to them, there's a bus. 1 kilometer inside, please help us bring the bus. This bus, just so you can imagine, had this red duct tape on its windows in a form of a cross, so they understand that it's a children's hospital vehicle, and not get killed on the way from Kiev, out of Kiev, etc. So we found the bus. We were able to bring the bus inside. We were waiting with ambulances with another bus, and eventually we were able to bring them to inside Romania with their parents, with their mostly mothers, and bring them in the last possible moment to the private plane, and from there to Israel, and so on. So this was a daily struggle, and this is the first thing I talked about, being there physically, communication, but also physically bringing and releasing them. I have to say, seeing the things that we saw there, this we called it, the refugees of the 21st century. It's something that I never saw. They left their houses with suitcases, and 2 children hanging on their young mother's hands, and it's snowing, and you see her face, and you talk to her and you ask, and she says, yes, I left my husband on the way here. He was stopped in order to go and fight. Again, I have two little children in Bucharest, and it was so difficult to see. So this was the daily struggle, and this was what we did in the border itself. The other thing we were focusing on was humanitarian aid. We received, my embassy specifically received a budget, and we were there on the border. We bought warm clothes, everything that you can think of, even toys for children, and we hang them we give them to whoever we see coming. In addition, we went to a few shelter homes and refugee camps close to Siret, close to the border on the Romanian side. Again, to all Ukrainian refugees who were there, we went with clothing, food, etc. to help. But in addition, the humanitarian effort of the State of Israel was bigger. First of all, at the beginning, we sent the State of Israel through the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, we sent 100 tons of humanitarian aid, including medicine, medical equipment. We had a list that we actually received from the Ukrainian government in the beginning, and we gave them exactly what was written, 100 tons of equipment. Then we provided 6 mega generators to Tel Aviv Central Hospital. This is in order to enable for them to continue operating. By the way, this 6 mega generators in the middle of the war, it was a logistical operation, because how do you, from where you get the generators and how you bring them physically into Ukraine. So we bought them in Italy and brought them through Europe. It was a whole operation. But the main humanitarian operation, and I will end with that before going into questions, the main humanitarian operation was the field hospital. We founded the first, and to my understanding, the only field hospital, which is not a military hospital. It's a civil field hospital that was established in Western Ukraine, about 20 kilometers with the border of Ukraine and Poland. And it had every given time 60 medical staff members from a hospital, from the Sheba hospital in Israel. They circulated, so eventually almost 300 staff members from Israel were there. It contained emergency, maternity wards, even a baby was born over there. We just last week, it ended its operation after almost 7 weeks, and the team handled more than 6,000 Ukrainian refugees. So this is part of the humanitarian work we did. There was another thing that we managed doing, which was the ministry had established what is called Matat, which was a donation and coordination center for civil society, NGOs, etc. So all the NGOs, all these organizations who wanted to help, they came to the ministry, which facilitated that logistically and basically helped them bring the assistance into Ukraine. So this is a little bit about.
It's an amazingly broad, incredibly broad, and I listen to you and I hear, like, we're so fortunate, we're here in the UK. It feels both inspiring, but also it has been, I know, heartbreaking. And for you, when you have described those who don't have the dual citizenship and men who were turned back, and that you were able to take women and children to safety, but then see those families part with each other, and how unbearably hard that is. I feel we could listen to you all night, and I'm so sorry that we have to bring this to a close now, because we also have a speaker waiting to join from Israel. Just want to say thank you so much, and it's so rich and full, the work that you're doing, and also I hope gives you a great sense of satisfaction, you and your team, of the enormous differences you've been able to make in individual people's lives, and please God also in the work around civil society. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Shalom.
Thank you. And I want to add my thanks as well. Thank you so much. And really, what a wonderful way of being able to share really stories that we can, I think, all agree we can be truly proud of what the State of Israel is doing. What a wonderful thing to be able to share on Yom Ha'atzmaut. I have the privilege of introducing Anna Kislansky, another dear friend of mine. It comes kind of with the territory of being international chair of Arzenu, that you collect Israeli friends, but none of us can have enough of those. So really wonderful. Welcome to you, Anna. I'm sorry it's getting a little bit late in Israel, but I'm really glad you are with us this evening. Anna is the chief executive of the Israel Movement for Reform and Progressive Judaism. She began her professional career within the framework of the Israeli Reform Movement actually 20 years ago, it is already now, as a community coordinator at Kehilat Or Chadash in Haifa. Between 2005 and 2009, she served as the central shlicha, the central emissary the Jewish Agency for Israel to the North American Reform Movement, and since 2010 has held high-level positions in the head office of the IMPJ in Jerusalem. Thank you so much, Anna, for coming to join us. I want to kind of, before we turn to the work of the IMPJ, and we definitely want to spend most of our time talking about that, I just want to connect to what Amir was just saying, because you have also recently had the opportunity to see firsthand, as you visited Poland, the work that is done in welcoming refugees and in supporting refugees. And I just wanted to invite you to begin with sharing a little bit about that trip which you took together with Reform rabbis from around the world.
Right. Thank you, Erev Tov, everybody. And I never take it for granted that Jews outside of Israel celebrate or make a mark of the Israeli Independence Day, and being part of our own reflections of what does it mean to be independent and to celebrate 74 years of independence. So toda rabah. Yes, right before Pesach, we were about 30 Reform leaders, mostly rabbis from North America and from Israel. We decided that we wanted to bear witness, to volunteer, to see what we can do in order to help refugees. So we went to Krakow, and we spent 4 days there. We went to the border of Poland and Ukraine in Medica. And part of the time we were volunteering, we also brought tons of equipment and also donations. And part of the time we were just learning, meeting with officials, whether it was officials in Krakow, in a border town called Przemysl, and in general, just witnessing all the volunteer work and all the work that is being done in absorbing Ukrainian refugees was just amazing. First of all, watching and just seeing all of the other Israeli NGOs there helping, supporting, giving humanitarian aid, and not just the Jewish Agency for Israel, of course, but also organizations like Natal and various youth movements doing some incredible work, young people, old people, people who have professional training, and people who just want to volunteer. It was really inspiring, and I want to relate to what my dear friend Rabbi Gilad Kariv said at the beginning of the evening, saying that Israelis, we feel like we get it. We understand what it means to aid other people. We understand what it means being a refugee. And I think that if you reflect not just on the Jewish experience of being a refugee and the Israeli experience, but just looking on how Poland is organized in absorbing and in helping all the refugees was really surprising, especially for us as Israelis. You know, we kept saying, well, Poland is doing for them what they couldn't do for us in 1939. And you know, some of those refugees are Jews, some are not. It doesn't really matter. The stories are heartbreaking. We had part of our delegation. I mean, I'm originally from Russia. I was born in Moscow, but my family made Aliyah and immigrated to Israel in the early 1970s. And of course, the origins are actually from Ukraine and not from Moscow, because my grandparents fled during World War II from Kherson to Moscow. So for us, it's the whole notion of the separating between who's Russian and who's Ukrainian um, is not something that is easy for us to grasp. But I wasn't the only one whose origin are from the former Soviet Union in that delegation. With us, there was Rabbi Miriam Klimova, student Rabbi Miriam Klimova, who's now serving as the rabbi of one of our Russian-speaking congregations in Israel, congregation Shirat Hayam in Haifa. And she's originally from Lviv. Her parents are still there, and she speaks fluent Polish, Russian, and Ukrainian. So she was very helpful in communicating to people, in even explaining to us what we need to do when she was communicating to the refugees. We had student rabbi Lana Zilberman Solowoy, who's originally from Russia. And for us to hear some of the stories, we met a young Ukrainian refugee who's now working for the JCC in Krakow, and she said, I'm from Ukraine. I have a broken Ukrainian because most of my studies were in Russian, but I don't want to speak Russian again. You know, the hatred, it sort of comes with, and we understand as Israelis the notion of war and hatred, and suddenly you hear it from somebody else who says, I hate Russians. I don't want to speak Russian anymore. But you hate everybody. So, but and you can't judge her, because whatever she witnessed was just something that is very, very hard to bear. We held a pre-Seder Seder there at the Ukrainian border, mostly with volunteers from Mexico and from Israel and from France and from England and from other countries, and some refugees as well. It was amazing. You know, we were teaching, student Rabbi Miriam Klimova was teaching Echad Mi Yodea, and we came back to Israel one day before Leila Seder, before the actual Seder night, and both two participants in the delegation, both Lana and Miriam, the next day led Seder for Russian speakers and Ukrainian refugees, and also just new Olim from Russia, because Olim from Russia are now also coming to Israel because they understand that you know, life is not is no longer comfortable even in Russia. So it was pretty amazing leading a Seder on the Ukrainian border, and then coming back to Israel and leading a Seder for Ukrainians, refugees, Olim, and just refugees. I mean, no, we didn't do the separation between who's Jewish, who's not Jewish. We just led 8 Seders like that in Israel. We got an amazing gift, a grant to do that from the World Union for Progressive Judaism. So we were able to do that. We didn't ask people, you know, to pay. We were able to cater for them to make sure that they are getting on buses, and whoever needs to go on the Erev Leil Seder, wherever they need to go, whether it's Netanya or Jerusalem or Haifa, they were able to do that.
And I think we have a little video, if I'm not wrong.
Yes, we do. Yes, we
so
do.
I
If you
think
wanna
what I'm
show.
going to do for a moment is I'm going to transform myself into the little video in some magical act, and then hopefully we'll be able to share the sound as well, so that now you should all be able to watch and hear this wonderful video.
Eloheinu, 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 שבשמיים ובארץ. אחד מי יודע, אחד אני יודע, אחד אלוהינו, אלוהינו, שבשמיים ובארץ. שניים יודע, שניים אני יודע, שני לוחות הברית. אחד אלוהינו, 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 שבשמיים ובארץ. שלושה אני יודע, שלושה אני יודע, שלושה אבות, שני לוחות הברית. אחד אלוהינו, 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 שבשמיים ובארץ. ארבע אני יודע, ארבע אני יודע, ארבע אמהות, שלושה אבות, שני לוחות הברית. אחד אלוהינו, 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 שבשמיים ובארץ. חמישה אני יודע, חמישה אני יודע, חמישה חומשי תורה. ארבע אמהות, שלושה אבות, שני לוחות הברית. אחד אלוהינו, 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 שבשמיים ובארץ. שישה מי יודע, שישה אני יודע, שישה סדרי משנה, חמישה חומשי תורה, ארבע אמהות, שלושה אבות, שני לוחות הברית. אחד אלוהינו, 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 שבשמיים ובארץ.
And I'm going to come back. Wonderful. So what a wonderful, beautiful example of the important work that you're doing. I know, so you've been talking already about the Siddurim that you're offering, but I know that also one of the things that I think I'm the most proud of the contribution that the Israeli Reform Movement has been making to the state of Israel more generally is also the legal support work that you do in supporting especially new immigrants or people who want to be new immigrants with their cases through the legal work of the Israel Religious Action Center. And I know that you're going to also, you're already investing in that work. I wonder if you could share a little bit, I'm not sure how many of our listeners are familiar with that work, whether you could share a little bit about the work that you're doing in that respect.
Yes, of course. So first of all, there's a lot of need for consultation and legal aid, and Iraq has a department dealing with that, working with refugees, new Olim, people who need proof of Jewish identification, or if they go through a conversion outside of Israel and they need to prove that they are eligible to make Aliyah, and people who are going through conversion in Israel. And of course, they're always busy, but since the war broke, we are flooded with requests and and with questions regarding that. And we're doing whatever we can to help everybody. It's also important to say that I think for the last 15 years or so, we put it as one of our main goals to be active in absorbing new olim, or people who are eligible to make aliyah in Israel. The aliyah from the former Soviet Union, the immigrants from the former Soviet Union transformed Israel. We're talking about 1 million, more than 1 million people who came to Israel throughout the years. So we had uh, the right infrastructure already in order to help people through the work of Iraq, through the work of our conversion of our Bedin. We have close to this in 2021, we had close to 300 Giyurim, conversions. And many of the people who go through our conversion Bedin are originally from the former Soviet Union. And again, as the Aliyah from Russia and from Ukraine is becoming bigger, then we expect to have even more people who are going through our reform conversion, and they all need legal assistance as well. So we're flooded, and we're doing the best we can. We also, I want to say, we have 2 Russian-speaking congregations. The video that you saw was actually the leader of the Seder was Rabbi Gregory Kotler, who's the rabbi of our congregation, Russian-speaking congregation in Ramat Gan, and he's also the head of our department for Russian speakers in Israel, and is very active in our. He's the mazkir, he's the secretary of our conversion bedin. So both of these congregations, every Shabbat, you get new olim and new people that are actually coming and saying, well, some of them are actually members or were members of congregations in Russia and Ukraine. And we expect this these efforts to grow.
So thank you so much. The title of this evening's panel was Kol Yisrael Aravim Ze Vazeh. We're all responsible for each other. And so I thought, as my last question for you, I would like to ask you, what can we do to help? We've heard about the wonderful work that you are doing. What can we do to help?
So first of all, get the message out about our work. Stay connected. If you get people that are, I'm sure your congregations to some extent are involved in helping refugees as well. So we're there for people who are considering coming to Israel, and both Iraq and the IMBJ are partners and will be happy to help. We're trying to grow our efforts also in terms of having more staff and having more empowerment group for women. We have a humanitarian aid fund called Keren Bechavod. We're always holding we're always holding empowerment groups for women up until the recent Aliyah and refugees coming from Ukraine. These empowerment groups were mostly for women from Ethiopia and for Bedouin women. We still want to do that, but we already opened 3 groups for Russian speakers because, again, the refugees are mostly women coming to Israel. So for all that work that I just described, we also need some financial support as well. So one thing that you can do is also help us by donating to this specific effort, and just keeping us on your in your hearts, in your minds. I think that even as I said before, celebrating with us the Yom Ha'atzmaut in a way that is deep and reflective, and not just, I love falafel and Israeli salad. I'm full I'm full of it, but I think the right way to celebrate the Israeli Independence Day is through dialogue and reflections with your Israeli counterparts. So toda rabba.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Really, thank you, Anna. So for those who are on the Zoom, you can see in the chat the address for donating. For those who are in person, they can't see the chat, so I'll just read out the address: www.reformjudaism.org.il/donations. You can support the efforts of the IMPJ. It was really wonderful. Thank you for being our final and highlight speaker this evening. It was really wonderful to be able to bring together 3 congregations and members from many more congregations. So I want to say a big thank you to my wonderful colleagues, Rabbi Shulamit Ambalu, Rabbi Deborah Bloston. We all had agreed, we all felt like Anna, that the appropriate way to celebrate Israel wasn't just to enjoy falafel, although we all enjoy falafel too, but to really celebrate and recognize the importance of the state by looking at some of the important work that is going on there. So with that, thank you from me, and I'm going to hand back to Finchley Reform Synagogue.
Thank you. So we thought that it was appropriate to conclude in the language of that Arzenu teaches us to speak in. Arzenu is the religious Zionist movement for progressive Judaism. It allows us to bring the values that animate our progressive Judaism into our relationship with Israel. And this evening, as we came into our time together, we learnt of another attack in Elad in Israel. And we're carrying both with us this sense of celebration and understanding, perhaps even a renewed understanding of the importance of the state, and also holding that with its maturation comes a still sense of fragility. So we're going to conclude with the prayer for the state of Israel, sung by FRS's cantor Zoe Jacobs. It speaks of the need to strengthen the hand of those who lead the state, and of the ability for us to see it as a flowering anew of the prospect of redemption speedily in our days. So I'm going to magically make Zoe's voice appear. She's actually in the choir rehearsal next door, but thanks to the wonders of technology, we can still hear and enjoy our time together.
שבשמיים, צור ישראל וגואלו, ברך את מדינת ישראל, ראשית צמיחת גאולתנו, הגן עליה, בעברת חסדך, ופרוס עליך, סוכת שלומך, ונאמר אמן.
Erev Tov.
ערב טוב, יום עצמאות שמח.